And today's panel is on master data management, and especially value-driven master data management. We have invited some experts and practitioners on the panel, and I would like to start with a short introduction to the panel. Can I please ask you to introduce yourself, your background, and your expertise? We can start with you, Jesper.
Okay, so let's see. Does it work? Yeah, it does. All right. So my name is Jesper. Oh, I'll sound like Darth Vader, as you said.
I had that earlier.
I need to be careful there. So, all right. So my name is Jesper Persson, and my journey when it comes to master data management and data governance, it started 2005. I was working at Tetra Pak at the time. Tetra Pak have tried 3 or 4 times to get this with master data correct, and they have failed, to be honest. You know, of course they advanced it, but they didn't really get the impact they wanted. And up until that point, they had only tried to do it from an IT perspective. So 2005, the global leadership, the global leadership team, which is the top management at Tetra Pak, said, we would like to make master data a corporate asset. And I was asked to run that program. That was a global program. Tetra Pak is present in 180 countries. And all organizations, all processes. And starting from there, most of the MDM practices was IT driven. So we had to invent, if you want to, a way how to manage data and data governance from a business perspective. And today that model, the program itself, it won, there's an international award around this. It's called the CDQ Award. It's something that happens down in St. Gallen. So we won that 2013. I have an interesting prize back home. And it also became one of the MIT's best practices for how to run this. So that's how I started with this. In 2013, I left Tetra Pak, and I've been working as a consultant here in Stockholm since then, and met the same type of challenges in most of the different branches. Well, the only place I've seen it's a bit different was I used to run a project in the UN, one of the organizations under UN, and politics is much more interesting perhaps for them than data itself. So that was a bit different. But other than that, it's very similar.
Thanks, Jesper. Hi guys, my name is Jignesh Patel. I work as a product manager at Stibo Systems, focused on the customer domain and our customer MDM solutions. Prior to my role as a product manager at Stibo Systems, I've had various product management roles, specifically focused on customer data quality, and really enabling organizations to drive true value from arguably their greatest asset, which would be their data. As a product manager, I guess I'm obsessed with understanding challenges organizations have and trying to build solutions that solve market problems. Over to you.
Thank you. You hear me? Yeah. My name is Carl-Göran Domeij. I currently work at Preem. I've been working for Preem since March, so it's not such a long time. But my journey with the master data and information management started 2010, you can say, and that was at Ericsson, where we started sort of basically from scratch. So there's been many iterations regarding to what we've done within master data. Struggling with various systems, implementing a large ERP system, managing the master data there, trying to build up organization, how to run the master data, how to incorporate into the business, finally taking in our master data platform and working with that one and going on. And the last years within Ericsson, we tried really much to tie master data or data management to information management and see how we could connect those two in together. And I was interested to hear you, Jesper, also about CDQ. We have a common interest that we also worked with CDQ as a part of Fraunhofer Institute for research within data, and very much on the forefront that we probably heard in the other room this morning, like how can you do predictive maintenance, how can you look into intangible assets and make that. Maybe not for this scoped data, but that's a little bit my background.
Perfect, thank you. Our plan for the panel is to make it as interactive as possible. So we will start with some questions to the panelists and then open the podium for the delegates to ask questions. Following the email thread before the event, Jesper, we touched on the topic of value-driven master data management and how to simplify it. Can we start with that, Jesper? So the question is, what is value-driven master data management and how can organizations achieve that? Where do we start?
Okay. I think it's a good question. It's a good question. Still today, when I come out to companies, it's quite often that I meet companies that there are some enthusiasts working with this. It's not very uncommon that I meet them and they have a project with business terms or start looking at information models, and they have a bit of a challenge to reach out to perhaps the business and get them really passionate about this. So this is about how can we change that? How can we change that? So, and of course there's not one silver bullet to do it, but imagine your value change. You know, take order to cash. You know, I guess all of you have an order to cash process. Well, if we should be good at what we're doing, we should now at this point be able to tell how does our data quality impact the business performance in our order to cash process. And not in terms of saying, you know, a capital letter and so forth, but really how does it financially impact us, say, with invoicing and so forth. Because at the end of the day, that's what master data management is all about, creating the value and ensuring you have the right quality data. Now, if you have come to that and understand how it impacts, if we now take the order to cash process again, and if we start looking at it from a master data perspective, all of you probably have 20 to 40 critical master data fields that will directly impact your process. It's basically always the same. So it's 20 to 40 of them. Can you name them? You know, can you name these 40, 20, 30 critical master data fields that impact you? And can you today tell which one you should improve tomorrow to improve on the business performance? Then you start talking about business value-driven data, master data management. So in reality, this is what you should be trying to look at if we try to simplify it. And way too often, and sorry for now we have different IT consultants, solutions consultancy, but I was working with a very nice fellow from supply chain, and he looked at me and said, why do you make it so complicated? And why do you make it so complicated? You know, my problem is that I don't know who to contact when it's wrong. You know, in this organization, Tetra Pak is of course a big company, but imagine this order to cash process where you start with something and something else happens very late on. How many of you have created a feedback loop? So the people actually creating the data can meet the people that are using the data. Because one way we can look upon our job working with master data management is to facilitate that discussion. That is really and that would really make it simple. That's talking about simplification. And just listening into where the problems are, we know where to focus. We're not going broad and doing the full business terms catalog, for example. It might be just necessary for these 20 fields. So really start working with that and trying to understand it from a business perspective. I think that's very much what this is all about.
Yeah, and just to expand upon that, I think that's great points. I mean, for me, it's very important that we understand the business problems. I mean, MDM could traditionally be seen years gone by as being an IT project, but really we're solving business problems and we have business challenges. And to get an idea of that, I think is very important. Understand, as Jesper said, who's affected by this master data. What are their challenges? How are they using the data? Really scoping in on the business problems and challenges, I think, is very important. And it comes to something maybe we'll touch on later, but the importance of a business case. I mean, it should all be driven in the business case. You should be able to look at a business case and understand the value you're looking to get out of this initiative, understand the problems, who's impacted, the stakeholders, and as Jesper says, you need to be able to facilitate those discussions, because that's where we'll see success.
Yeah, I think it's easy to sell in the concept of master data if you do it like, okay, we get better quality of data, we take control of our assets and data assets and so on and so on. But again, I think it was said in this room before lunch, is that why do you get a data warehouse? Because it's good. And in many cases, we need to have master data because it helps us. But if you can't scope out what you're really going to utilize it for, it can become a cost rather than some benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect, thank you. Carl-Göran, we talked in the...
There was a question there. Or are we...
Sorry?
There was a question.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. I'm sorry.
So, what does a MDM solution technically look like? I don't have a concrete picture of how companies usually work with it. Is it a single database that holds the truth, or is it a sort of federation of databases, or what does it look like?
It's a great question. And I think it's general concepts you see across, depending on which domain, master data flows from, whether it's product master data, customer-driven master data, assets, so on and so forth. But it is about getting a single unified view of master data, whichever context, which will drive value across the business. So consolidation, how you onboard data, how you consolidate that data, cleanse that data, enhance that data, and then share that data across the business to solve those business challenges is important. So it does vary. It varies within the domain, it varies within the users, and so on and so forth.
Could you give an example? Is it could be, for example, an internal web application where you can view the federation of database contents and curate it manually? Is that one example? Or?
So for me personally, from a customer domain perspective, it is about getting that single unified view to then empower business critical initiatives. So it's very rare that you would have standard business users access an MDM application. The MDM application is almost that black box that allows you to serve this single view of data to a CRM, for example, to an e-commerce platform, Customer 360, whatever it may be. So the business users see the downstream benefits from this single unified view.
If I would try to add to this, I think sometimes it's healthy to also start thinking about what is it if we just have one system. So we are in this perfect company that holds only one IT system. All right? Would that mean that we don't need any MDM solutions? And of course you need it. There's the trick with master data management is to get the right data quality at the right time. Okay, so one aspect of this would be, of course, if you have a challenging IT landscape to get this, single record of the truth. But I would say that's the only thing. That's one thing in many. It could be other things. It could be if you would meet with, I don't know where you work, but if you would meet with your top management, how do you present master data management so they understand which decisions they need to take? Okay, that's something else. That's something else. If you meet people in the management team, level 1, level 2, level 3, they're there to take decisions. They're very good at taking decisions, and they would be less interested to know about single version. Well, it could be if they know the impact of it, but what they would like to see is how do we present the case and can take a decision on it. And that could be other things, as you were mentioning, quality systems. That could be other things that allows them to understand what's the situation, what decision do I need to take, what is the expected outcome of it. It could also be in some cases, especially if you are in a global company, and this was of course true for Tetra Pak, where they wanted to start centralizing everything about vendors and suppliers to get control, especially about direct vendors. I will also indirect later on. And there suddenly part of the MDM suite was workflows, ensuring that the data came in a structured way, that you had the right approvers in the place, that quality was really safeguarded going in. So it could be different things depending on, as you said, different scenarios and different domains. Did that make sense?
Okay. Let's go further. Carl-Göran, you mentioned in the email that change management, clear data ownership, and operating model are key factors for success in establishing a solid master data management strategy. Could you please start with that discussion?
Yes, it's something come to learn over the years, at least in my experience, that these are very crucial for getting things working. And let's start with the ownership. And we talk about master data, we talk about data, but my view, data is solely information in data in digital form. If you consider data as being something that you have in the system. So for me, it's important to try to, if you want to have ownership, you need to also look into the layers above. If you say that the data is on the lower level, and we have the business terms and the concepts that business are working with, which actually then becomes data in the end. Now, if some things change up in the business, of course, we need to change in the data layers as well. But if you put like data ownership on lower level, it might be difficult to get I usually call it the vertical transparency. It's like if something happens up here, you will need to see it down here. And to create some kind of ownership about that, I think it's, first of all, I think the ownership should be as much up in the business as possible, supported, of course, by some kind of master data organization. And the reason for that is because up there the changes happens, and we could also follow those changes. And okay, let's say we start with master data, for instance, and we have the customer master. Okay, let's have a information master, and so on. So we can get those aspects into the scope as well. The second thing is, okay, now we can manage and we have control over our, let's say, customer master then, because we have the ownership for that and so on. But eventually the customer master or customer information will interact with products, maybe with sales and other types of domains that we have. And then it's not enough just to have this silo-based ownership. We need to look at the other transparency, as called the horizontal transparency, and that is very much how does the information flow in. We're not looking maybe at business processes, but we're looking into how does the information flow. Information flow could be floating as parts of data for something, or it could be manual achieved. And if we have that sort of cross-functional transparency and we have the ownership, it's much easier also to look into, okay, the capabilities now, we need to handle customer master in another perspective. Then it's easier to actually then obtain those things if you have that control. But again, it's also cumbersome to push the ownership up to the business. But the business has a lot of things to do, so it's a way to work. It doesn't come automatically unless the awareness already is there. But I think that's a way to go, anyways. So that was one part, I guess. The other one, change management. Also, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think, again, if you want to go in for a master data platform, for instance, and so on, it will no doubt change way of working for many people. Not only, I mean, the IT project itself to implement the platform, to do the data cleansing and so on. That's something you can do, but it could also mean that the pre-work before that is not mature enough. So then you get into a complex situation. It's not just to do it, because it might be organizational issues, there might be political issues that you need to solve in advance. I give you one example, which was interesting as one aspect on it. It's what my former employer, as Ericsson, we we grow a lot during a number of years in the early 2000 by acquiring new companies. And we did it due to several reasons. And there was one acquire which we would do as an M&A and merger and acquisition. Thank you. And it was a company that produced similar products to us. They had a similar customers and similar processes. So we thought this is an easy task. Okay, but you know when an M&A happens, it's a lot of issues you can't tell about until it's tell day. And after tell day, you have done your due diligence and everything like that, and then you're ready to go. And you can do due diligence on the financial parts and things like that. But something which is often missed, and at least in our case, was to look into, data, structures, how do we incorporate the products into our own system? Because we eventually, as we're going in for a merger, we don't want to have duplicate systems selling basically the same product. We want to take them over there. But in this particular case, it was very interesting because Ericsson has a very good, mature way to handle its products. I think actually the ideas originate from 1930s or something, still valid. So we have that structure, and we can then sell to customers based on what we have in the structure. Very easy. So we can sell the same thing. We have traceability back to releases and things like that. The other company here, they had a different way. They didn't have this structure. They treated every customer as a single line, and they sold solutions to them. I mean, it was the same hardware and software, but the structure was completely different, which meant that when we tried to merge the product master and our product master, it was completely impossible at the start. So when the tell day was, and that was clear, it took us 4 years to actually achieve a merger based on that. And that's why I say it's very important, and change management and labor intensive work could happen if you don't do a proper background research on what you actually should do. So now working with master data, I think taking incremental steps is the best way forward for you, so you can take control of what you want and you don't have too many stakeholders to discuss with and so on. Yeah. And the operating model then, finally, I think much of what I said now is included in that. Of course, we need to have governance, we need to have ownership, and we need to have a master data process, and not a business process. We need to have a process for managing master data. And we need to have a setup. How do we want to work with master data? And if you just look at the data itself, and we don't see it as a combination of information and data, do we want a platform for hosting, a hub for true single truth, or do we want to apply also ETL, extract, transform, load capabilities? Do we need to? Do we want to look into it as a data quality tool? Do we want to actually utilize it as a workflow? So there are many things you can do that, so it's also important to think about that. But that's a part of the operating model, of course, then when you create your process. One thing that I think is also important, also a case that if you build up the operating model around one organization, let's say we have this master data organization, they take care of all the master data things. It could be good as long as that organization runs, because working with master data and multi-domain, you become a very good experienced person in the company and knowing all the business processes. However, if the company then suddenly decides to, okay, we need to do outsourcing here, we can't keep everything like in Sweden or something like that, or offshoring it. There is a risk, and if you build up everything around one organization and you move it to, I don't know, China, Philippines, India, whatever, it will drop. So it's important, I think, an operating model needs to be sort of people or organizational agnostic as much as possible, so it can be reused and put wherever you want to put it. So, yeah, that's little, yeah.
I was just going to add around ownership. I thought that was really interesting, because if we think about the entire notion of master data, it's data that's shared across the enterprise. It could be data that's shared across globally, independent business units running, independently. But if we're going to master this data in this context, then you start getting into the political landscape around, well, who actually owns the data, which can be challenging. And you mentioned it there around setting it up governance and perhaps some sort of master data management user group within the organization to help evangelize this. I think that's something that I've seen customers implement a lot of success in. So have a working group across the business who can help take that master data management journey across, because you will get political questions around, well, I own that data, it belongs in my system. When master data management, the entire concept is that we're sharing data, a single version of truth across multiple landscapes, which can be interesting.
Yeah, if I would try to put my words and add on to what is said. First, one piece of advice, which I realized when we talk about this. Ownership, I've never been so close to a fist fight as when we started to talk about ownership. And there was a team that worked very well together. And we were in a conference room. It was a round table, I still remember this. And they were so upset with each other. And then I still remember, this is 10 years ago, but it was Chris Reineck, a colleague of mine. He looked upon one of the colleagues and said, "What's the definition of ownership? Because you can't be this stupid." And it turned out that different versions and different types of ownership. And if I will not go into, because that will probably take us a bit too long. But imagine that you need someone to rule own the rules. You know, what is a good or bad quality? What defines, say, a customer? That's one type of ownership. We eventually call that rules owners. And then you have a number of customers, and that happens in the line organizations, which is the content. And then we started to talk about content ownership. And if you work in a big organization, actually what you look upon ownership is different between different organizations, what the culture is. I will not, it will take us too long. So, but beware that there's more than one type of ownership. And when you deal with master data management, you as professionals need to separate those and make it very clear to the organizations, because otherwise you might end up fist fights where it's non-necessary. So that's one thing.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's a loaded word, ownership. Absolutely. So you really have to be careful of doing that. And also maybe finding one way of doing it is to say you have sort of owners then, if they agreed upon it, but to have some kind of council where you take common decisions. That's one way of really, so the ownership lies within the council, for instance, so everybody has to be part of the decisions taken and so on. But
I may, okay, so then I'm not totally agreeing with you for once, because actually when, and this is something I've seen in other companies as well, when you start separating the ownership and telling, what type it is, that path to set ownership in this huge global company, it went very quick. And I've actually been to other companies and being clearer on what it means, and also, what type of ownership are we talking about, helps organizations to say, okay, that's me. So actually, it's a way to make it less political by separating it. So, but that was one thing that came to mind when you presented. The other thing that I had the opportunity to go down to Liechtenstein. I met with Hilti. So these companies, of course, have exchange practices behind. So I was fortunate enough to come down to Hilti. And up until that point, when I was thinking about master data domains and models and so forth, how do you build those? How do you build and agree upon what data is in what domains? How do you set the domains? Well, very often there's someone, enterprise architect, that starts and building it up. Sometimes you go to a reference. What Hilti did was take it the other way around. They knew exactly what type of data, but they were looking upon how do we govern our company? How do we govern our company? In the top level, what are you responsible for? What are you responsible for? And then they had taken and created the domains to match how they were governing the company as such. And suddenly what happened there was that you had master data correlating with how the company was governed anyway. Do you think it went quicker? Do you think it was simpler? And they actually had, I don't know they still have it, but they had a way to present the total governance of the company, saying these are the different responsibility areas, this is the data that the C-level management owns, and these are the processes on one page. It's the most beautiful thing I've seen when it comes to this. And the way they did it was to take the modeling and the domain discussion, not bottom up from an enterprise architectural perspective, but take it top down.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but we have run out of time. But just before we end this, can you give 5 common mistakes organizations usually do in their projects?
So I think something that ties into what we've discussed over the last few minutes is lack of executive sponsorship. I think it's very important within any master data management initiative that if you have the right level sponsorship to evangelize the initiative, you can make change, you can make things happen. So it's very important to have executive level sponsorship. And that leads on to the business case. Again, you should be able to look at your business case and be able to tell the executive, this is why we're doing this is why we need this initiative, these are the problems, this is the value, these are the stakeholders and the business users impacted. I think those two come hand in hand and at the very start of an MDM journey.
Yes. Don't underestimate the effort needed when you go in for a master data. Be very clear, be very precise, because if you work with data, it's not like, sorry, if it's working with processes here, processes is something you can understand, maybe not exactly, but you understand them anyway. But if you work with master data, you are on the nitty-gritty syntax and things like that. So you need to be very careful looking into what systems are you integrated, how capable are them, and so on. So it takes more time and effort than you initially might think. So.
Yeah, and what I'm been trying to tell, if it's always difficult to be the last one out, so why did I pick that one? But again, master data is very much about structures. All of us working with this knows it's structures, and something that should be what is our customer and so forth. But keep in mind who the structures are for. It's so often I go out and it starts from enterprise architects and so forth, which is of course a very clever thing to do, but don't lose sight of the of your customer, which is the business, and try to stand in their position and saying, I'm in your shoes now. It should be as simple as possible for you. It should not be simple for me. It should be as simple as possible for me, and then starting to devise your programs from that.
And if I could just add one more, and I think it goes in aligned with what we're saying here with my fellow panelists, but customer MDM is a journey, or MDM in general is a journey. So try and identify value early on, work towards that value, because it's going to help you keep the momentum. There's the term, boiling the ocean. There's no silver bullet. It's about starting with a goal and working through the journey. I think that's very important.
Thank you. Do we have any questions before we close this session? Okay, thank you so much.